record and then I'm going to share my screen and then we'll just go ahead and get started, and people join, we'll just add them as we go. Okay, just make sure this is open. Okay, here we go. Can you see that okay? All right, so, oof, hold on, this is being a little bit wonky. Let's close this first. Okay, so in this class, in this little workshop, I wanted to talk a little bit about, hold on, I'm just gonna stop for a second, what vitalism is. So vitalism is the type of herbalism that I have studied a little bit more in depth. And so I just wanted to communicate kind of what that is and what that means and what some of the concepts are, just so that, you know, as I'm talking about things, you can kind of know where I'm coming from in my herbal practice, and so you can better understand, you know, the approach that I take in herbalism. So, you know, I mention this every time I have a call, but nature has everything we need and more. And so a big part, most of the time, and I'll get into what I mean by most of the time soon, but a big part of holistic herbalism is, yes, about the plants that we take from nature, but also what nature can offer us in terms of, you know, the energetics, being out in the forest and getting the benefits of the extra oxygen, and all of the things that nature can provide us beyond just taking plants, creating medicine, consuming it, but all of those things combined. I'm gonna skip that because you both know who I am. So what is vitalism? So vitalism it's a specific approach to herbalism that considers both the whole person and the whole plant. So when we look at, you know, whether or not we want to treat something with a particular herb, we don't just think about the symptoms that the herb is generally good for. We also want to think about the energetics of the plant itself, you know, certain energetics and certain affinities that it has for certain organs. And then we also want to look at the person. So we want to be very personalized in our approach. So if a type of herb might be good for headaches, but it's also creates a lot of heat in the body, and the person you're giving it to already has a lot of heat created in the body, it may not actually be the right herb for them, despite it being good for a certain symptom, because of that. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that as well. And vitalism doesn't subscribe to the allopathic approach. And in a couple slides, I'll get into what that means more specifically. And it does not prescribe herbs as a replacement for pharmaceutical medication. So a lot of times, especially with herbalism, it's very enticing to want to try and, you know, say, okay, I normally take Advil for a headache. I'm going to go ahead and just replace that with Tulsi and rose, and, you know, because those can be good for headaches. But we don't want to just try to exchange them like that, because then that's going by the allopathic approach. Let me see. Okay. So before I get into what allopathic means versus holistic, I want to just outline really briefly what the 7 tenets of vitalism are. And so this particular type of herbalism just focuses on these 7 points whenever they're thinking about creating formulations and working with herbs. And so as you build your relationship with the herbs that you know are receiving in your herbal CSA, you can kind of apply these tenets or these overarching goals to that work with each plant. So the first one, and I'll get deeper into each of these points as well, but the first one is that we are forever a student of nature. Forever. It never ends. You never, a master herbalist, I think, you know, when people talk about master herbalism and master this, I think it's a very Western way of looking at it. You know, you could at one particular time in your life have a very strong relationship with a plant, And as your body changes, as, maybe you move somewhere, your environment changes, your personal circumstances change, that particular plant may no longer be suited to you, may longer be suited to somebody you're prescribing for or making medicine for. And so we're always learning, we're always taking in. We always want to consider the root determinants of health. So rather than just the symptom, we want to consider what is causing dis-ease in the body. Whoa, sorry. My computer is kind of losing it a little bit, so it might do some weird things. We want to consider the wholeness of people and plants. We want to think about botanicals in their full self rather than, extracting things from it. Symptoms are a language. We want to be able to look at a symptom and use that as a way to read the body and read what might be happening internally, because it's trying to communicate something to us. We want to use full spectrum plant extracts. So instead of taking out the one thing, that that a lot of times allopathic medicine and pharmaceuticals would do is take out one part of a plant and use it in a medicine. We want to use full spectrum plant extracts. And the idea behind that is that the energy of the plant also provides healing, as opposed to just whatever chemical constituent is in the plant that helps. Do no harm. We always want to make sure we are certain as we, identify plants, as we work with plants. We want to make sure the way that we create plant medicine is safe. We also want to not harm the earth. So if there are wild medicinals that are endangered or, going extinct, we don't want to overharvest. So we always want to just make sure we're being conscious of that. And then we want to be a virtuous healer. We want to make sure that we are living in our values and always putting healing first. So I don't know why it went down like that, but allopathic versus holistic. So I just wanted to identify what the differences are between those two things and what some of the myths behind herbal medicine can come up when you're kind of comparing these two approaches. So allopathic medicine, this is just the definition that I found. It's a system in which medical doctors and other healthcare professionals, such as nurses, someone's waiting to be let in. Sorry, for some reason, it's not popping up on my screen.
Sorry to interrupt. If you were showing slides, they're not showing up.
They're not. Okay, let me see. I'm not sure why that's not working. Is that there now? Can you see that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's just because my computer's acting a bit strange. Okay, so thank you for letting me know. So this was the 7 tenets of vitalism. I'm going to bring these up again in their own separate slides, so that'll be more precise. But yeah, allopathic medicine is a system in which medical doctors and other healthcare professionals, such as nurses and pharmacists and therapists, they treat symptoms and diseases using drugs, radiation, or surgery. So it's sometimes also known as biomedicine or conventional medicine, mainstream orthodox medicine, and Western medicine. And so when we're thinking about the difference between allopathic and holistic medicine, these are some of both myths and things that we want to avoid. So allopathic medicine often treats symptoms rather than the whole person or the underlying disease. So very often an allopathic medical doctor is like the doctors you go and see most regularly in the United States. So, for instance, I go to my physician or my primary care physician, and I have chest pain, and she's like, it's not anything with the heart, it's something called costochondritis. And so immediately she's like, let's just give you 600 milligrams of Advil twice a day until the pain goes away. But when we think about holistic medicine and holistic herbalism, I personally would like to know why the joint between my breastbone and my rib is inflamed. What is that? Why is that happening? What are some of the root determinants of this particular health concern? and how do I address those? A lot of people also think they can just take an herb and, like I was saying before, replace a pharmaceutical medication with that herb, and that they're one-to-one. But herbs are a completely different approach to health. And so, they deserve a type of approach and a skill set for administering them. So you're not going to, have a relationship with Advil and then say, okay, I can just swap this out, because we don't really have a relationship with Advil. We don't know what's in it. We buy it from the store, we pop it in our mouth, and that's kind of the extent of our relationship. And so when you're working with herbs, you want to have a much deeper relationship with them, because that is more holistic. These are myths. So one myth is that plants only, treat the root cause of ailments. And that is true in many cases if you're using them properly and you're approaching it holistically. But plants can also suppress symptoms, just like pharmaceuticals. So I could take, ginger and turmeric for my costochondritis, my inflammation, which I did do. But if I'm not addressing whatever the root cause is, that means the symptom's going away, but it will likely flare back up if I don't address what it is that is actually causing this inflammation in my body in the first place. And so, this similarly is like, I had a friend with back pain and she wanted something for the pain, but then was concerned that she wasn't really addressing why. And if she couldn't feel the pain, then how would she know which movements cause the pain? So that's why if we approach it holistically to treat a symptom, then hopefully we will also find the root cause and then be able to use herbs that also are able to address that root cause. Herbs are not a one size fits all. Some people will have adverse reactions the way they might with certain drugs. And this is a big one because oftentimes, especially since I'm making a lot of skincare, people just assume like, oh, it doesn't have chemicals in it. I'm going to put it on my face and it's going to be fine. And my face is going to look glowing and amazing. And for some people, that very well may be true. And for other people, that particular herb, there's the sebum on their skin, their environment, it just might not work out. And so it's really important to remember that, because many herbs too are very powerful and they're very strong. And so we want to make sure that we are treating them with the same, I don't want to say hesitance, but the same caution as we would pharmaceutical drugs, because the worst thing that could happen is like, you're like, oh, I learned that calendula can be really good for, an irritated digestive tract. Let me make this tincture. Let me give it to my friend because her stomach's been hurting and she's going to feel better. And then she feels worse. And so we want to just make sure we're being cautious that some people actually find that calendula, although a very amazing healing herb, irritates their skin and irritates their stomach. So we will always want to approach our herbs with the same respect and caution as we would pharmaceuticals. Illness itself is complex and has many underlying causes. And so I put this here because allopathic medicine, at least in my experience, and I'm sure in many of your experiences with it, can sometimes approach each person as though they're just, a number on a chart. And, oh, this person is experiencing, this chest pain. They're just they homogenize us. They lump us all into a category, and then they often treat us in that way. And so in order to be fully holistic, we want to remember that illness is complex and the underlying causes can vary so greatly. And we want to make sure we're always paying attention to that as we're working with herbs to try and solve whatever health issue or dis-ease we are experiencing. I also really like to mention this one, that herbal formulation is not as simple as just throwing herbs together that might ease certain systems. It's a really complex art and deserves intention and attention. At the beginning of my herbalism journey, and I'm sure for many of us, like, I got really excited. I'm like, oh, all these, like I always have had stomach issues. So I'm like, all these herbs are good for stomach pain. I'm going to put them all into one big jar and I'm going to drink that. And I didn't feel better. And that's because we want to make sure that, again, we're being mindful of all the energetics of each plant, how the plant's energies work together with one another, what the energetics of my personal body is, or your body, or the body of somebody you might be trying to help. And we want to make sure that we're being very mindful of all of these little things as we formulate. So the first point of these 7 tenets that I would like to point out is we are forever a student of nature. So, as we shift and grow, our knowledge and relationship with nature and certain plants can shift and grow as well. Some herbs that at one particular time might have worked really well for me, like for instance, before I had children, my relationship with them is not as deep, maybe because I can't take certain herbs when I'm breastfeeding. Or, my hormones have changed a lot after I've had children. So being mindful of this so that we can continue to learn and grow and keep receiving information from the herbs that we are in relationship with. Never be too proud to learn either. I'm sure we have all experienced people, whether in herbalism, in farming, in any field, where they think they know everything because they've done it for 10 years, 20 years, whatever the case is. And that is just not a very, well, one, it's dangerous when you're working with things that people are ingesting or putting onto their bodies, because new information is always coming in and we are always learning. And we want to be able to shift with that and never be too proud to learn. Even if you think you already know about calendula, another herbalist could have had very different experiences, and it's always important to take all that in so that you understand other people's experiences with plants as well. Not making recommendations lightly. This is an important one because, just because it's an herb doesn't mean it's not powerful. For instance, it's very easy to go onto the internet and say, something that'll help me with childbirth, and things like black cohosh come in, and black cohosh, we're not going to get deep into that during our time together. But when I told my midwife that I bought it, this was before I was really into herbalism. She was like, no, 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 and it's because of her personal experiences with it. She knew it probably wasn't the best option for me. And so we just want to make sure when we're making recommendations or taking recommendations that we then go ahead and do a lot of research beforehand, so that we're being true to this, this constant learning. Consistently connecting with and immersing ourselves in the natural world is very important, not just with the herbs and the plants that we're working with, but also with the elements. Herbs and plants are all associated with certain elements: water, earth, fire, and so being able to convene with nature on a regular basis will, just help our spiritual energy flow better with our active herbalism. Being in the forest and being out and just being observant always helps me come to realizations about formulations and, just being able to engage with it in that way, because we are all a microcosm of the natural world. And so remembering that we are also the earth and a part of the landscape within ourselves will inevitably help us get better at our herbal practice. Oops. Considering the root determinants of health. So like I mentioned, allopathic medicine, it often doesn't consider the whole person. It doesn't necessarily consider their background or their lifestyle or their diet before prescribing the medicines to suppress the symptoms. The process is often very impersonal and very homogenized. And so in holistic vitalist herbalism, we really want to make sure that when we're sitting with somebody or even with ourselves and we're thinking, what do I want to take for this constant chronic headache I've been having? We want to think about, okay, do headaches, migraines run in my family? What has my lifestyle been like? Am I feeling very stressed? Have I been working out? What has my diet been like? Has anything there changed? We want to just really, what is my emotional life like? What are my relationships like? What is my financial health like? What is my spiritual health? We want to ask all of these questions so that we can be very, very personal with what herbs we are giving ourselves or other people. So yeah, vitalism, it considers our lifestyle, the general constitution of the person. So when I say constitution, I'm not sure if any of you have ever done a Ayurvedic, hold on. I'm just gonna see if I can find the link. But like an Ayurvedic test or quiz, like to get your dosha. But I found it really, really helpful because many of us, like we have certain constitutions. So we may run hot and dry. So, our lips are often chapped despite hydrating. We often run hot, so you feel really warm in certain situations. Others of us run cold constantly. Your fingertips are cold even when it's warm. You find you're always bundled up. And so our general constitution is also going to really impact how we take a certain herb. So, I was mentioning a little bit earlier, if there's a particular herb that's really good for a symptom, maybe it's breaking up congestion in your lungs and you've had this cough, this wet cough that just won't come out. And so you want to take something like, mullein, and, mullein itself is generally cooling. And if you're already a cool person, it may kind of help that symptom, but you might want to pair it with something warming like ginger so that you, sorry, my thing is, I'm trying to admit somebody. I might just stop sharing just for a second so I can add them. Oh, there we go. So you might want to pair it with something warming just so that you're, yes, paying attention to the symptom, but then you're also paying attention to the general constitution of the person. If you're doing an intake for yourself or for another person, I generally just recommend it be long and it be very informative so that your general state of being and your general constitution, so that whatever herbs you're prescribing for yourself or others works well. So that also brings us to, considering the wholeness of people and plants. People have their own constitutions, hot and dry, hot and moist. And then plants also have their own constitutions. Some things may be very warming and others very cooling. So we want to just make sure that the energetics match so that even though the herb might heal a certain ailment, it might not be suitable for the person. So here's an example. Peppermint is a very big herb that's used for healing gut issues. It's very drying and it's very cooling. And so if you're already cool and dry, you're cold often, you can't seem to hydrate well even when you're drinking a lot of water, it could actually exacerbate your symptoms and make your stomach hurt worse. So something that might be a bit better for someone who is cool and dry and experiencing stomach issues, maybe something like a blend of marshmallow, which is very moist. It's very moist, it's mucilaginous, and ginger, which is very warming. So the ginger is going to help stimulate the heat inside of the body. And then the marshmallow, although it is cooling, has that mucilaginous. And so the two paired together can do very well for you. And so I wanted to just state here again, one herb does not fit all, whether it's an internal remedy or an external remedy. Some herbs, that are meant to reduce inflammation, for instance, might cause irritation for some people. And so we always want to make sure that we're mindful of considering the wholeness of
Wow. You feel
each of us.
you feel the comfort of my arm?
Sorry, Alexandra, I think you're, thank you. Hi, by the way, thanks for coming.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So the next tenet, the body is intelligent. Symptoms are a language. Our bodies are very smart. And when we have a symptoms, it's communicating something to us. It's important to listen to all symptoms, not just those that are particularly noticeable. Some symptoms, we don't want to suppress them, but we want the body to be revitalized to help move it through. And so I wanted to use the example of a fever. Oftentimes, if something is coming up in our body, there's a reason for it. And so sometimes if we jump on the symptom too soon to try and squash it, we can actually not allow our body to go through the process it needs to go to move whatever is happening through. And so sometimes we may be more inclined to choose an herb that's going to help our body deepen in a certain symptom. And so, fevers are a good example. So fevers help disperse heat. So, they initially make you really hot inside, and then hopefully, as the fever burns off, you get chills, you get sweaty. That's your body trying to expel this fever. And, if you have kids or you've heard of febrile seizures or convulsions before, oftentimes these come because the body is trying to get this fever going to push out the illness, push out the warmth from the center of the body. And instead of being able to do that, we often will immediately squash the fever with like Tylenol. And sometimes children will have febrile seizures because of that, because the body is not able to push that fever out. And, so this is obviously a more advanced type of herbalism that I do use with my children, but, I'm constantly monitoring. But ginger, for instance, is something that's really great for this. So, it allows the body to warm, and then what it does is it creates that heat and then helps the body push out fluid. So then hopefully you're able to expel that excess heat. Excuse me. And so we don't always want to treat symptoms because they sometimes will mask that root cause. And we want to make sure that the body is going through the process it needs to go through to allow the symptom to move through. So next tenet is using full spectrum botanical extracts. So often in Western medicine, they'll pull out a particular extract of a plant because it is the most valuable extract. It's the thing in the plant itself that is seen as the valuable component that's going to fix whatever the ailment is. But when you do that, when you pull out just the singular extract, you lose like the whole vital force of the plant. So I use the example of skincare because you can purchase botanical extracts that, have been created in a lab. So they're standardized. So you know exactly, what percentage of this you're getting and what percentage of that, at least to an extent. But again, you lose the spiritual, energetic force of the plant, which I believe, and in holistic herbalism generally believes that that energetic component is also part of why the plant medicine works. It's not just that constituent, it's not just the chemical, it's also the life force of the plant itself. So an example is turmeric. The most prized constituent in that reduces inflammation and helps with joint pain is curcumin. And it's often extracted. They'll often pull it out and put it in a capsule, or pull it out and put it in a powder that you can mix into water for skincare and stuff like that. But then you lose the other constituents in turmeric that make it whole, like these things that I can barely pronounce, curcumin, these other types of curcumin, and then, lots of volatile oils and sugars and proteins and resins. And all of these things together, they work in harmony because, I believe plants are perfect in the way that they behave and the way that they create for themselves. And you lose all of that, so if you're only getting the curcumin, you lose that symbiotic relationship and that wholeness of the plant. And so using full spectrum botanical extracts, a very simple way of doing this is, foraging and using the whole plant. So, for instance, chickweed, pull the whole thing, use it, dry it. If you're using it in tea, garble it down and put that whole baby in some tea. You don't need to pick off the flower. I don't even know how you would do that at home, but pick off the flowers and only use the flowers or only use this, but you can use the whole plant material in your formulation. And so speaking on this, talk about using full spectrum botanical extracts, I wanted to just briefly mention sourcing your botanicals. I highly recommend growing and foraging yourself if you can, because these will always produce the most potent medicine. And I wanted to give you a little example of some herbs I have right here. So this is chickweed that I bought from a local herb store that I love. They're great, they're amazing, but I just want you to notice briefly the color of this. It's a bit brown. It looks a bit dry. The smell is a bit mild. It doesn't smell very earthy or green. And then I wanted to show you the chickweed that I just harvested and dehydrated a couple of days ago. And I mean, look at the difference in the color. Like, that is crazy. So you can imagine like which one is fresher and which one is probably going to be more potent. It's going to be this one because I know when it was harvested. I know it smells so fresh. It smells like spring. And I know exactly what temperature, it was dehydrated under. I have all this, the stems, the flowers, the leaves are all intact. And so I'm going to garble this down and use this. And I know that it's going to be more potent. And, a big part of the reason for that is it's just like our mass scale of producing food. Things have to sit a lot longer. So I have no idea. I bought this from her, a couple of months ago when chickweed wasn't in season again yet. And could have been sitting there for 2 years for all I know. Maybe she doesn't sell that much chickweed. I don't know. And so, obviously if you have no other choice, you got to do what you got to do. But I highly recommend getting a foraging book if you're in the Northeast. This one is incredible. Northeast Medicinal Plants, and trying your hand at foraging. And then if you are unable to forage or just don't have the time, because it does take time and energy, local co-ops like our Honest Weight food co-op tends to refresh their herbs a lot quicker. So they often will have a fresher selection. You can also check out local farmers, and parks is for foraging, and herb shops, and then online. If your last, effort or your last shot is to get it online, then do what you got to do and get it online. So the next tenet is do no harm. We don't want to hurt any person, of course, but we also want to make sure that we're sustainably sourcing, if we're growing and harvesting medicinal plants. We want to make sure that, we're being mindful of what we're taking from the ecosystem. We don't want to take too much, always be mindful to take only what you can use at one given time. If you do use a lot of plants like I do, like I'm not going to use all this now, but I will use this over the course of the month. I'm going to put it in the cabinet away from sunlight. It'll stay warm. And there was tons of this chickweed where I found it. So just being mindful of that. And if you're ever unsure, just research. Use your phone, take pictures, use multiple books, always just double, triple, quadruple check. There's no shame in any of that. I sometimes am like, my brain, my memory is just not amazing. I don't know if it's because I've had 2 kids, probably. But so sometimes I'm like, dang, I do a workshop or do something and people are asking me questions and I'm like, good God, I don't remember. And so I just often will bring back notes for myself and bring my books and use my phone, and there's no shame in that. We want to make sure that we are certain before we're like, oh yeah, that's chickweed, go ahead. It could be something poisonous that we don't know about. We want to make sure that we're not being too proud to continue looking up and learning as we go along. And, we want to be virtuous healers too. Practice what we're preaching. If we're saying to people, forage, don't just buy on Amazon, and then all we do is buy on Amazon, that's not good. And, I'm not gonna lie, I buy on Amazon sometimes, but I also am a avid forager. We have to do what we've got to do, but it's also very important to practice what we preach and to, have good integrity. Heal ourselves with our products. Use the things that you make so that you can deepen your own herbal self-care practices. Use your approach on yourself before you sell it to other people. I was like, in the beginning, of the journey, it's oftentimes very exciting. And so we want to like give people this and give people, but make sure you're testing it. Make sure you're like using it on yourself and slowing down, because herbal medicine is a very slow intentional process, or it should be, so that we're really deepening in our relationships before we're putting it out into the world, just to make sure that we are putting something out that is going to help people and not harm them. Okay. So those were the 7 tenets. Before I continue on, does anybody have any questions about those? All right, let's keep it on then. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about herbal processing. Many of you are probably familiar with these things, but I just wanted to mention them anyway. So one of the best things you can do with herbs, if you're not using them immediately, is dehydrating them. This is my favorite way of storing plant material, unless it's like something particular that I would use in like cooking, because then I will often freeze it. But dehydrating plant material is a great way of maintaining the integrity of the plant as long as we are dehydrating them properly. So my favorite way of doing it is in a dehydrator. I know those are not always accessible to people. So if you do need to dehydrate them at room temperature, like hanging them, I highly recommend wrapping them in a paper bag and then hanging them, because then this protects it from UV light. And so it won't get bleached by the sun, and it'll maintain the constituents a lot better than if you just let them lay out in the sunshine. You also don't want to heat too high. It will often ruin the constituents of the plant. So I've seen people, like putting them on a baking sheet, putting it in their oven, and our ovens just usually can't go quite low enough. Some of them can, but I have seen like where they get crispy and hot, and you just don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you are dehydrating them slowly under a light heat. And so then that, be mindful of the color and the smell and the texture when you're sourcing. Like I was showing you here, like this is going to be more potent, fresher. It's just going to work better than something like this that's maybe been sitting on the shelf for a couple of years. Anything that has little or no scent and is particularly colorless is likely either old or has been improperly dehydrated and won't often give you the constituents that you're looking for. And then, yeah, mentioning again, if you're dehydrating in the sun, it can bleach the plants. And so you can, if you do have like a greenhouse or something outside that you want to dehydrate in, just covering them with a sheet can really help decrease some of that UV light damage. And then you want to store it in opaque containers or in a cabinet. So this is not opaque, but I'm going to be keeping this in a closed cabinet, and it'll only be taken out as I'm using it. So, and I will put a cap on this as well. And so some of the ways that we might use the plants that we are foraging or harvesting or receiving from others is in tinctures. So extracting plant constituents into alcohol, glycerites, extracting plant constituents into vegetable glycerin. We might infuse some oils, plant constituents extracted into oil to use primarily externally. Decoctions. So a decoction is essentially a very strong tea. So you're either simmering plant material in water or letting it sit in water, like in a jar in like your refrigerator for an extended period of time. And then you can also do double extracting. So this is a combination of a tincture and a decoction. And when you do this, you get both the water soluble and the alcohol soluble constituents, because different constituents or different benefits of a plant have different solubilities. And so then that's when we speak about solubility. So some constituents in plants are alcohol soluble, some are water soluble, some are fat soluble. Depending on what you want to extract, the menstruum you use is important. So I did send you all that link. So that's a pretty extensive diagram of solubility of certain plant constituents. So you can just take a look at that in your own time. But these are just some examples. So resins, for instance, are alcohol soluble, excuse me. So the resins in the calendula resina, for instance, does really well being extracted in alcohol. So like the tincture I sent you, that's going to be very strong with the resins that help with the digestion and all of that. Volatile oils are also present, extractable in alcohol. Monosaccharides, organic acids are water soluble, and then full spectrum extracts are often double extracted to get a little bit of all of those things. So here's that really big list. You can check out that link when you have time if you want to really go deep into looking at certain herbs and what benefits you're extracting from them with different menstruum choices. So tincture making is a great way of extracting plant constituents. Usually if you're tincturing with alcohol, you're gonna do 3 or more weeks. And fresh plant material is always going to be the most potent, but you can also use dried if you desire, or if that's all you have. Spring is a great time to get out there and get some fresh stuff and just, immediately rinse them, let them dry off a little bit, and then put them in alcohol. And so the folk method versus the weight method, it really depends on what you want to do. I almost only use the folk method. If I were trying to be more of a clinical herbalist and less of a community herbalist, I would probably go for the weight method. And so that's when you calculate the weight of an herb to the volume of the menstruum. So, 1 ounce of dry herbs to 5 fluid ounces of menstruum, and then I can get a more specific profile of what is coming out of each bottle. But the folk method is very simple. So you would just fill your container with plant material. You would probably want a little bit less full than something like this, because you want there to be some space between the plants so that the menstruum can really move in and out and cover it all. And then you would just pour the alcohol up as high as it will go just to cover the plant material. Again, I would probably take a chunk out of here. But then you just cover it, shake it, and you let that sit for 3+ weeks, and you shake it, once a week, every couple days, and then strain that out, and then bottle it. And there's different types of alcohol that you can use. Everclear is the one that I often will use because I'm usually using fresh plants. And it's really high alcohol content, and it's predominantly used for roots and barks and very watery fresh plants. And then you can just also use vodka, which is just 80 proof. And if you're using dry herbs, it's plenty. And then you always want to make sure you label the plant and the date, because you will forget. Sometimes I used to not label it, and then I forgot what the heck was in it, and so then I couldn't use it. So glycerites, this is tincturing with vegetable glycerin, and this is generally a 4 to 6 week extraction. And you want to use 100% glycerin with fresh plant material, which will be potent. It'll be very sticky. But that's what you want to use at least initially, and then you can add some water after the fact to kind of even that out a little bit, or you can even add things like vinegar to improve the taste and the texture. For dry herbs, you would want to rehydrate it with about 25% of water, and then add, so I put 75% of water. That's not correct. 75% of glycerin to make sure that it's preserved properly. And I'm going to send you all these slides as well, so that you don't have to remember all of this now. And if you wanted to add a little bit of alcohol to preserve it better, to improve the consistency, and to extract different constituents, you can also do that. So I often will add a glycerin extracted plant material, or in the menstruum, with the alcohol together. And so it sweetens up the alcohol, and then I'm getting both the water soluble constituents and the alcohol soluble. And then infused oil. So it's best to use dehydrated herbs for infusing oil. It's very easy for water to cause the oil to go rancid. And it's just hard to know, how much, is there too much oil in this? Too much water in this particular plant? I don't know. So I will almost exclusively use dehydrated herbs. For things like dandelion, I'll usually let it wilt and then make the oil, and then make whatever product I'm making with that oil immediately, because you really just don't want to play around with water and oil. It will go rancid. It's happened to me before, and it's not cool. And so you can, again, either use the folk method where you just add your herb to the jar, pour your oil of choice over, shake, label, and extract for 4 to 12 weeks, shaking every couple of days. And again, strain, pour into a jar, and label. Or you can use the heated method where you use a double boiler, put the plant material, the oil, and heat for about 45 minutes on very low to more quickly extract. Strain, pour into a jar, and label. And I know we're running out of time here, but I wanted to just mention oil selection. Again, I'm going to send this to you, and then I also sent you a chart. But if you are interested in getting a little bit more into the skincare side of herbalism, I recently took a course and did not realize that like how different every oil is in terms of their fatty acid profiles, how quickly they oxidize, so how quickly they will go rancid, how you can improve the shelf life of certain oils, and then whether or not, you know, like depending on what you want to use the oil for, like, is this particular oil good for this particular application? So, you know, some oils oxidize very quickly and they're not recommended for like heated oil infusions because when you add heat to an oil, it oxidizes more quickly. So things like rosehip and argan do not like being heated at all, and you're most likely going to destroy the fatty acid compounds in there by heating them. And so you want to use just the folk method when infusing these oils. And then there are other oils that tolerate low heating, such as jojoba oil, olive oil, and hemp seed oil. And then another thing I want to offer that not a lot of people think about is no matter what kind of oil you're using, I highly recommend adding vitamin E, tocopherol. Specifically, there's different types of vitamins E's out there, but the tocopherol is an antioxidant that will slow down the oxidation of your oils and increase its shelf life. If you're going to consume the oil, like if it's an olive oil you're using for your cooking and your skincare, don't do this. Don't add this because I don't know if you're supposed to consume this particular type. But it's a really good idea. Like if you buy, let's say, a little bottle of rosehip oil, I highly recommend adding 0.5% vitamin E to that bottle. And then you don't have to worry about adding it to future formulations, but it's going to help slow down the degradation of that oil, and it's going to increase the shelf life of the oil and then any infusions you make, any products you make in the future. So it's a good idea to do that. And then, you know, always consider that not all oils are suitable for your skin type or your needs. You know, if you're making a massage oil, for instance, with red clover because it's good for your lymphatic system, you're going to want something that absorbs slowly, like sweet almond oil. If you want something on your face, you probably want something that's a bit lighter and that's going to, you know, soak in a bit quicker, like fractionated coconut oil. And then you want to think about different fatty acid profiles as well. And I'm going to send more resources about this particular stuff over the coming weeks as we play around with a little more oils, and I'm going to send you a little more things. But I just wanted to mention it briefly here so you can start thinking about that idea that not all oils are created equal depending on what you want to use them for. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure I sent you both of these about carrier oils. I'll make sure I sent both of them. And if not, I'll make sure I get those to you after this call. My kid's yelling for me. And then I wanted to just, again, talk briefly before we go about the best way to build a formula for particularly external remedies, salves, body butters, balms, things like that. It's really a good idea to formulate everything by weight as opposed to measurements. So as opposed to like cups and tablespoons, because it's going to give you a much more precise formula that can be replicated, and then you can expand it, you know, to make more, or you can reduce it to make less when you're formulating different batch sizes. So for instance, let's say you want to try out a balm for your skin. If you say, you know, a ratio is 80% oil and 20% beeswax, then what you would do is take your, okay, I just want to make 2 ounces, just 2 ounces. Then you figure out what's 80% of 2, get a little scale, and then you know exactly how much that is. And then this is going to make sure all of your stuff too is like, if you loved something you made, you can always replicate it. Sometimes when you use spoons and cups and then you get a different bag of beeswax or a different jar of shea butter or whatever the case is, then things can start getting thrown off and it's like, dang, I really like the texture. It's different. I don't know why. This is probably why. So highly recommend using your weights and your percentages as opposed to cups of this and cups of that. So a good example is a salve ratio, just a basic one, is 80% oil to 20% beeswax. So if you do that, you know, you can use your 80% of oil and break it up into 3 different oils. And you know that as long as those 3 oils equal that 80%, then I've got the oil. And as long as that, you know, beeswax is the 20%, then it's going to be a pretty good ratio. So just a little brief mention of that. And then I just wanted to mention 2 book recommendations. If you are, you know, a foraging book for your region, so I know 2 of you are here. So this one, I already mentioned it, The Northeast Medicinal Plants by Liz Neves. This is an amazing resource. The pictures are great. She talks about energetics. She talks about the history of a lot of stuff. It's a really good book. Of course, this is not a know-all. So I always double, triple check some of the other books and online and, you know, different things just to make sure I know what I'm talking about and what I'm reading. Because again, every herbalist is going to have a different relationship with the plant. And it's good to learn as much as you can about a particular plant before you start working with it. And then also work with it so that you can learn it yourself. And then the other book I'll mention, which isn't in here right now, is the Encyclopedia of Herbal Medicine by Andrew Chevalier. Again, it's another good resource, has a lot of information, but it's not a know-all. So you always want to double, triple check your resources. Okay, I know that was a lot of info. I'm going to be sending you all these slides, but I did want to open it up just for a brief moment for 1, any questions you might have, and then 2, any feedback or any questions you might have about the calendula box that you already received. If you had any questions or clarifications or wanted any, I don't know, just wanted to open up the floor in case you had anything. Hold on, I'm gonna stop this really quick. Yeah. And if not, no worries.
I have a quick question
Sure.
about the vitamin E oils. I was looking at a bottle recently, but I still don't get what it is. Is it like a mix of other oils or like what exactly is it?
So vitamin E oil, it is made in a lab. So it's an extraction of tocopherol, which is a derivative of vitamin E. It's kind of complicated, but yeah. So unfortunately, it's something that they extract from I think it's called tocol, which is a chemical, and they create like a very potent antioxidant. So it's good for, you know, reducing the oxidation of oils. And sometimes they do have some that have blends. So if you get one, I'm gonna look up the one that I have. I recommend getting at least one that's 95% mixed tocopherol. Hold on. Because you want the tocopherol. There's also like a something with an A, and you want to get the tocopherol specifically, because that's going to be the one that actually has the antioxidant quality. Okay, yeah, so this particular one is derived from plants, and it's purified, it doesn't contain GMO. So this is what it says on the website. It's isolated from the distillation of soybean oil and concentrated to contain naturally occurring mixed tocopherols. So it guards against oxidation and extends your product's shelf life naturally. So that's what it says. So I'm going to just add it in the chat.
So it's good for like topical type stuff,
Exactly.
right?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. So if you're wanting to get more into making product, all of my the products that I make that are for your body that contain oil have the vitamin E in it to extend its shelf life.
And how much longer does it extend it? Or does it that matters based on what oil you use?
Yeah, so it depends on what oil you use. So for instance, the shelf life of rosehip oil is like 6 months. So it's really low. And so if you use vitamin E, it can extend it to like a year. Which is like doubling the time. So, but yeah, it really depends. And it also depends, there's a lot of factors that go into that too. So it's like, how are you storing your oils in general? Are they close to something that's hot? Are they freezing? Are they in a shed outside and exposed to the change in temperatures? So you want to make sure you're always like, I keep all my things in a little cabinet. They're not close to heat. They're not going to get frozen, because that all will impact your shelf life as well.
And I have one more question about how do you ever use an herb net? Like hanging up? And if you do use it, like, should it be away from sun
You said
or like in a shade? Yeah, it's like this. I bought it I saw it somewhere on like somebody else's garden. But they had it like in a container. But it basically is like a net that you can hang from the ceiling, and it like has sections that you can zip open and close, but like you can put your herbs in there to dry them.
oh,
But I didn't know. I was like, oh, should I keep it away from sun? Because I forget about that part. I just put them in there and let it dry, but sometimes the sun does be on them.
yeah, you mean like the the drying rack? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, my understanding and my experience is like they're so much more potent when the sun is not touching them. Um, there are solar dehydrators too out there, so I don't
Oh,
know
okay.
if they're designed in a way that like shields them enough from the sun while also retaining the heat to actually dehydrate them. But I
Yeah.
just know that, I've hung things in my kitchen, for instance, out and then hung them in bags to see the difference. And there is a huge difference. Like the smell is always stronger with the ones in the bags. Um, they just the color is darker generally. So my understanding is that, and then poke a couple holes in there so that they can have some airflow. Um, but yeah, if I had one of those hangers, I might cover at least like the outsides with a sheet and just have an opening that I could reach into. But that's just because my understanding is that yeah, UV light degrades the quality.
Okay. I didn't know that. There's something new.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, sure. Anybody else have any questions or anything? Any comments? Okay.
I appreciate the handouts. Very nice.
Yeah, of
Or
course.
the links that you share.
Of course. And if you ever have any questions that come up throughout, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. Um, that's what I'm here for. And I'll send you all these slides as well so that you have them. Okay, I got that. Thank you, Rosa. All
I just
right.
wanted to say, I wanted to just say that I really liked the protection scent. Thank you. It's like,
Sure.
yeah, really well made, and I definitely wear it for protection.
Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for that.
I really liked that scent too, and I put some on today too.
Oh, yay.
Yeah.
That makes me so happy. I'm so glad. That was a last minute thing too. I was like, needs to be something, you know, that engages that sense.
Yeah, I appreciate the full sensory experience.
Yay. Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate it. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for being here. And yeah, feel free, shoot over text, email, whatever works best for any additional questions, comments, concerns, anything you might want to see in the next basket, always open. So please do reach out.
Thanks, Brooke.
Thank you.